All right, good morning, family. I was sort of debating if I should try to finish the Abraham and Isaac story and then go into Isaac. We're doing the legacy series, so we're going to talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph. Do you want to finish the last week, or you want to go ahead? Well, then we'll never get done. All right, I'll give you just a couple of things. So I don't have time to explain it all, so if you've never read the story, but God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son, Isaac, and we talked about that in quite a lot of detail, but there's so much more that needs to be said about it. And let me just summarize it this way to say, today, 2024, if you read a story that says, God told, Joe Piscopo to sacrifice his son Sammy over on the south side of Walled Lake, you would all call the cops on Joe. Okay, so let's just be honest about the story that we're reading. Today, when you read that part of the story, it causes shock. A God that would tell someone to sacrifice their son, you'd say, well, this guy's lost his brains, and we're gonna have to call them in. Okay, so let's be honest about how we would think about that today. That's the shock. But the shock in their day would not have been that, because they had heard hundreds of stories about that. God, they would say, oh, the gods told me to sacrifice this, 2 cows and my firstborn, or this, or whatever it was. So the shock 3,000 years ago would not have been that a God told them to do a sacrifice, even if it was a son. The shock would have been the end of the story. The shock would have been, don't kill him. What? There's a God that doesn't want you to kill? There's a God that provides something else? And this was an unbelievably shocking story for completely different reasons. So one of the things that might help us is if we understand that, today, people still sacrifice their children, just very slowly, drip by drip. We don't like the word sacrifice, and I'll say surrender. Slowly, you give your child to something or someone. And in fact, there's a healthy way to do that, and there's an unhealthy way to do that. Because at the end of the day, you have to let them go. That's called healthy. No? Okay, I'll come over here. Yesterday, Charlie was, it's summer, and so it's her first summer as a 5-year-old, of course, and so I don't know anything, and I don't know what summer as a 5-year-old is. I mean, warm weather-ish, I'm saying, where it's a Saturday, and the sun's out, and the kids are on their bikes, and Charlie's got a bike, so she wants to go be with the kids on the bike, and what about me? And all of a sudden, I'm not as important as I used to be. And now, she gets on her bike, and she starts pedaling, and last year, I left her tires flat, so she couldn't get that far ahead of me, And this year, I decided to pump them up a little bit, Well, it's good for her legs, too. But, man, she was gone, just gone down the street. And I'm like, wait a minute, gone, right? Then she found the other kids, and for the first time, she's like over at around the block on her bike with some people that I don't know. And I do not like it. She's gone. But evidently what they say is it's healthy to let them go, And hopefully you stay in a wonderful relationship and all that, but they have to launch, they have to be on their own. And so everybody makes a sacrifice. And so what the Bible does so beautifully is it dramatizes this in the most dramatic fashion to get you to think about what you are sacrificing your kids to. You got to have drama, otherwise you wouldn't pay attention. That's what the Bible does. It just takes it to the absolute extreme so your eyes just focus on this story. Just like, we're watching, Vicki and I are watching a show on Netflix, and you know how some of these go, right? Not next thing you know, you're 3 episodes in and you're trying to get some sleep. Anybody? And, no, but they always hook you with the drama. And then right at the end, you're like, don't end that way. No, now I got to watch one more before bed, right? So this is drama gets you in. So what they've done is they've dramatized the story of Abraham and Isaac to drive home a point. Everybody sacrifices their kids. It's just more subtle. It's more gradual. But the key is, do you give them to God? That's the key. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that one to bed for now. Maybe what I'll do is I'll finish that story a little longer we'll do it online or something. Because we have to talk about Isaac. Of course, this affected Isaac. And what we're going to notice as we read the story of Isaac's life is how much he's like his dad. We have sayings. The apple doesn't fall too far. You know that one. You lay down some tracks. That's what legacy is about. Legacy is not about you trying to get your own PR campaign so people will think that you're better than you were. Legacy is just the way that you live your life is going to leave a trail, and there's a good chance that people are just going to walk right down that trail. Which is why you have like generational addictions that need to be broken, cycles that need to be broken out of. Some of you did a marvelous job of breaking out of a really bad cycle. Good, too. Way to go. Some of you are still fighting it every day. Keep fighting, right? Get out of that rut if you have to, whatever it takes. The cycles of debt, Some of you are like, that's all we ever did was debt. That's all we ever did was fight. That's all I ever saw was fighting and screaming. It's true. If all you ever saw was fighting and screaming, what do you think is normal in a relationship? Fighting and screaming. I mean, everybody's got a road that's been laid for them, and it's work to move out. And so we're going to see Abraham was not perfect by any means, and neither is Isaac. But they've laid their tracks in the direction of the divine. And that makes all the difference. There's no shot at you being perfect. There's no shot at me being perfect, but you can lay your tracks in the direction of the divine. You can aim yourself towards God and the highest possible good. That's what we're thinking about. By the way, if you're a non-believer, you're struggling with this whole idea, you can just substitute the highest possible good for God, making the sacrifice. What do you sacrifice your kids to? The highest possible good. Can you deal with that? That's what you want them to. And then when you do, you find out that it gives back to you. So, Genesis 26, we pick up, now Abraham has died, and Isaac takes center stage. Genesis 6:21. Now there was a famine in the land. Remember this one? Who else had a famine in his time? Dad, Abraham. It says, in fact, he says there, or the writer says there, besides the earlier famine of Abraham's time. Just to clarify, this is a new famine. It's worth noting that a lot of the things that you will face in life, your parents already faced. In some form. Not everything, a lot of things they already faced. About the time you turn 36, your parents are brilliant. Something about the 36th birthday, like, man, my dad was a genius. Not a minute before then, they're morons. Is anybody with me? But after you have 36, you're like, man, okay. And if you have them around, you can call them, good on you. I sure wished I had my dad to call on. Dad, Dad, you don't believe what happened. I was like, yeah, that happened when I was 28. Yeah, I remember that. How'd you handle it, Dad? Well, son, it's not easy. But here's what you can do. A lot of the toughest things that you face in life, your parents have faced. They're not as dumb as they look. And so there was a famine, not like the one Abraham had, that Isaac gets his own freshly minted famine. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. And the Lord appeared to Isaac and said this, do not go down to Egypt. What did Abraham do when the famine came? He went where? To Egypt. What's your first inkling? This is all about legacy. Do what Dad did. Do what Mom did. Do what Grandma did. This is the tendency. So I think the voice comes to him, don't go there, because that was exactly the thing that he was going to do. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. So he moved, but instead of going to Egypt, he kind of goes the other way. And this, I think, is the thing to think about as we talk about legacy and generations is, parents leave us a legacy, because what Abraham did is, if there was a famine, if the door was closed, he had to moved on for his family. You ever seen somebody that hung on too long at the wrong thing? Anybody ever been around like a boss that just hung on too long? Like, dude, it's over. Retire. You ever been around somebody that's they're just clinging to something that it's over, and it's like, this is famine, you got to move, time to go. So they move, and Isaac, like his daddy, moved. Now, moving's not easy. Moving's not simple, but he had to move. And he was a good provider for his family, like his dad was. So he got to a place where they could settle. But he went to a different place, and that's the thing to think about. There's some similarities to how you will handle things, and then there will be some differences. That's the sweet spot. It's still hearing God, because God says to him, don't go to Egypt. You're going to do this. And so sometimes what we have to realize is that God's going to lead you to a different place. Stay in this land, now listen, and I will be with you, and I will bless you, for you and your descendants, and I will give these lands, and I will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. God is now speaking directly to Isaac. He had spoken to Abraham, and Isaac had sort of absorbed this promise from his dad, but now God speaks to him directly. Now listen here. Heard this saying. See if this makes sense to you. God has no grandchildren. Each generation is going to need to connect to God directly themselves. You can guide them there, you can lead them there, you can lay the tracks for them, but eventually God has to speak directly to them. They have to connect directly with God. Someone said it to me years ago, and I never forgot it. God has no grandchildren. He can no longer ride on Dad's coattails, although they were so fabulous in getting him where he was. Now God speaks to Isaac directly. And I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give them these lands. And through your offspring, all nations on the earth will be what? Blessed. This is exactly what God promised to Abraham. I'm not just going to blessing to you, but blessing what? Through you. Remember that one? Through you. To the earth, to the ends of the earth. God's going to be good to you, and he's going to be good to you so you can be good to everyone else. There is never the point in life for God to be good to you just for the sake of being good to you. Although that would be enough, because that's how loving God is. But what God does is he's good to you so he can be good through you. The prayer is not, God, just bless me. It's let your blessing flow through me. Because Abraham obeyed and kept my requirements, my decrees, and so Isaac stayed there. When the men of that place asked about his wife, did you pick up on that? Now, if you haven't been coming to church, you don't know these things. We just talked about this. What happened to Abraham when he moved to Egypt? They started asking about what? His wife. Who's she? Abraham says, that's my sister. Like father, like son. Isaac says, that's my sister. Because he was afraid to say, she's my wife. Like father, like the legacy continues. A little lying, a little deceiving, a little cutting corners. And he thought, well, they'll kill me if they know it's my wife. Then one warm summer evening, Isaac was getting frisky with his sister. And the king saw it. And he said, I don't think that's your sister. It's all, you should read the Bible. I always tell you guys, I don't think that's your sister. Why didn't you tell me? I was afraid. For as great as these men were, they both were captured by the same fear. I was afraid. I was afraid. And it turns out they had nothing to be afraid of in both cases. You inherit fear too. You get from one generation to the next, you inherit it. They're afraid, and I'm afraid. They're afraid, I'm afraid. Should have just told me. That's okay. The king says, don't anyone come near her. Isaac said, I thought I'd lose my life. I thought she's kind of pretty, and I thought you guys would just kill me and take her. And Abimelech gave orders, no one come near her. And Isaac started to prosper in this land. He planted crops, he reaped 100-fold, and God blessed him. He had so many flocks and herds, and so all the wells that his father had dug, the Philistines, right, filled them up with earth. This is going to become a central part of the story of Isaac's life, the digging of the wells. His father Abraham had dug wells, and the Philistines covered them up. Now, what do you use a well for? Well, you got to drink, and you can't just go to the faucet because there's no faucets and there's no plumbing, and everything revolved around water. And Abraham moved from a land that was by a river, and they had rivers and they had canals, but these areas were dry, they were arid, it was desert, and the only way to get water was you had to go down, you had to dig. And so wherever you had a well, you had a source of life, you had a connection. And so the legacy of Abraham was all the wells that he dug. He knew right where to go. And he went to them, but they had been covered over. The source of life had been covered over. And I think that's what's happening today. Jesus says, later in the New Testament, he says, all you who are thirsty, come to me, and I will satisfy your thirst. Because you aren't just thirsty for water. What are you thirsty for? God, the divine, the transcendent. Why is it that people still have all kinds of money and all kinds of things and they're still thirsty? It's because we have to know what we are. I say this all the time. You're not just a body, you're a soul. If you were just a body, all you have to do is stuff food in. Can you imagine that? We just have like a little feeding machine. You could walk by here. I could just go, potatoes, mac and cheese, 3 stops. You could just, I could slap you on the back and you'd be gone. Because you have no emotions. You have nothing else. Your body is stuffed with nutrients. See you in a week. Get going. That's not how we are at all. We are complicated. Thank you. Aren't we? You're crabby. You're happy. You're jealous. You're angry. You're sassy. Right? Because something else is brewing in there. That thing is the soul. That's the real you. And the real you has to eat and to drink. You know what your legacy will be? Just like Abraham. The wells that you dig. Your kids will come along. Where's Dad's well? Isaac's like, I think it was over here. I remember I was about 12 when he dug this one. Your kids are going to remember the places that you went to get your thirst quenched. If you know what I mean. Where does Dad go to get deep satisfaction? Well, you'll always find him up at Joe's. You always see this, you always see, okay, whatever, I'm not, have a drink now and then, do your thing. But I'm talking about the deep thirst. Man, you'd always find him in the house of the Lord. You'd see him in his chair. My great-grandpa had a legacy, for my grandma called him Pop. So Pop would always put his leg over the side of his easy chair, put his Bible up here. He's a farmer. That's how Pop always read the Bible. You're digging wells, and your kids know where the wells are located. And now, people are trying to fill them in. I think that's what's going on in this generation. You don't need all that stuff. You don't need all that churchy, Jesus-y, religious-y. You don't need that stuff. That's old-fashioned. That's outdated. They're caving in the wells. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You don't need any of that. Are you sure we don't? Are you sure? You know what's fashionable now? What's fashionable now is that everybody older is really stupid. No, let's just be honest. Especially like a generation ago. Absolute morons. Now, were there some things that we could improve on from previous generations? Everybody say, absolutely. Yeah. Of course. But to act like those wells didn't provide the water of life, my friends, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, yeah, the Bible my grandma gave me, it's red, it's imitation leather, and it's in King James English. So truthfully, I don't really read it anymore because I don't read King James English all that well. But she gave me the Bible. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? So I read it a different translation. What this generation wants to do is to take the whole thing and throw it away. They want to bury the wells. All of these wells have been this contains life, and they're just caving them in. The one thing Isaac knew was that this is what Dad did. He used to dig these wells. Abimelech said to Isaac, this is the king in the area where he lived, you need to move away from us. You become too powerful. So Isaac moved away and encamped in the valley of Gerar, and he settled there. And Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of Abraham. There's life in Jesus. There's life in God. There's life in the church. There's life in there. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there. He even started digging more wells. And after he dug up his father's, then he started digging new ones. How many know we could even use that? And then along came some other people, and they wanted to quarrel with him. And they said, well, we want that. And the herdsmen of Gerar, they came, and they said, that water is ours. And so they named it Esek, which Esek basically means dispute. Isaac said, well, you can have it. He went a little further, and he dug up another one. And then they followed him. They said, I want that one. He said, okay, you can have that one. And then finally, he dug a third one, and no one came after him. And he named that well, There Is Room. There is room. What do we get from Isaac? Well, I think Isaac didn't have time for the fighting. Just go on and dig another one. Anybody get tired of fighting? Yeah, you're like, I'm just tired of the fighting. It's exhausting. You want? You can have it. You can have it. Now, I get it. There's certain things where you gotta stand your ground and hold your ground. I get that. I think that's legit. But something about Isaac, there was wisdom in the idea that he wanted to spend his energy on good things. Because, man, it's exhausting fighting. Huh? This side's kind of smug today, but I'll stay here for a minute. Anybody ever get tired after a long argument? Or you feel like, oh no, I got a burst of energy. I'm just ready to go. Because if that's you, you're sick. You're just yelling and you're arguing. It's like, I'm just so tired. People just fight and fight and fight and fight. And something along the way just, okay, you can have it. You want that well? You can have it. I'll go over here. Because guess what? God's going to have a well where there's plenty of what? Room. Jesus called it turning the other cheek. You can have it. Who's on your side? God's on your side. If God's for us, who can be against it? It doesn't matter. You can have it. Some people are so stubborn, they hate to lose so bad that they will waste their life fighting for this well. You could have been long gone over here enjoying some fresh water and building your flocks and building your family and moving on with your life. There's a lot of wisdom in making peace. Did you know that? There's a lot of wisdom in living in peace. It just is. It's just a better life. Sometimes you just got to move on. I put so much work. I know all the things that are the voices that are screaming in your head about staying there to fight for that one. But sometimes you just got okay. Now, Isaac's found his spot. And his family begins to flourish because he's connected to the source. you are going to do the same things by just nature. You ever notice somebody and you're like, oh, that's so-and-so's kid. You can tell by the way they walk. You can tell by their mannerisms. You can tell by certain things. Like, you are just going to fall into this thing where you're going to do. Isaac, the first thing he does is he goes to dad's wells. And what you will tend to do is you're going to lay down some wells and your kids are going to go to those wells. This is how dad handled the problem. Dad was a screamer. I got to scream. I don't want to, but I got to. Dad was a deceiver. I got to deceive. Dad was a worshiper. I got to worship. Dad was a peacemaker. I got to make peace. It's just the human nature, is the tendency. I want to leave you with this thing. Don't let people, because they're burying the old wells that give life, don't fall for that. Maybe Abraham didn't have that many Instagram followers. But it doesn't mean he didn't know anything. And people come in and they're just trying to bury all this stuff that's old. And sometimes stuff's been around a long time because there's a deeper knowledge. And what you have to do is you have to dig deeper. And our society is suffering from the shallow. Just look around. It looks like desert everywhere. And there's no wise people to say, you just got to dig deeper. You got to go down. Because, church, it's so yesterday. Church was so grandma's era. You're like, no. Just sit there and dig down. Just keep digging. Because underneath there's this artesian spring that bubbles up to life. And whatever you do, the first thing to know is this: your tendency is going to be to do what your family did, and your legacy is going to leave for your kids to follow. They're going to tend to do what you tend to do. Do a little inventory. Is this where I want to sink my well? Where you sink a well is where you spend your time, where you spend your energy, and where your kids are going to go. Funny thing, my dad's gone, and I was telling you about losing my grandma this year. It's a funny thing, if I go to certain places where my dad used to go a lot, I have a certain emotion. Like there's a donut shop that if I were to go to that donut shop, my eyes would just well up. Because that was his spot. He'd go and get coffee and donuts. They connect to these things. Legacy is understanding how powerful this force is that you lay down for your children. Like a magnet, they're going to be pulled to this. And so Isaac keeps sinking wells. And my prayer for each and every one of us is that we could realize that, we have to sink the wells, stay connected to God. You know what that is for you. But if you go too quickly if you don't think. See one that's been buried over, and that was a yesterday thing. And if you pause, you'll say, no, that saved our family. That saved my dad's flocks. We need to uncover that well again. We're going to say a prayer, but I want you to think, shovel in hand, right? In the heat of the desert. I don't know exactly all the tools they had back then, but there were no well-digging trucks, that much I know. Hot, hard, physical work in the sun. But sometimes to get to the best things in life, it's hard. Do the hardest things that you need to do to stay connected. Do the hardest things that you need to do. You know what things I'm amazed and stunned by? I'm just going to be honest with you. There are times I sit and I watch people come into church. I watch you guys hurrying and kids and doing all these things. And I'm just humbled by it. People have to get up and they have to get their kids ready, especially people with lots of kids. Oh, man. I'm humbled by it. But I'm also saying, way to go. Do the hard stuff. How many know it's easier to not do it? Way easier. But as we like to say, choose your hard.